Hey you guys, happy Monday. Today is the this marks the 6th week of school from home, and I'm really proud of you guys, all the work that you've been putting into getting your assignments turned in. A lot of you have really been communicating or over communicating with me when you can't get stuff in, and I think that that's really good of you. I want you to continue to do that. This week also, the discussion answers looked much better. A lot less of you are using Google and Wikipedia and all those things for your answers and putting those things in your own words, which is what I'm looking for. Please continue to do that, and please continue to carry that on to all of your assignments, because in high school it is a non-negotiable that you write in your own words or you give the author credit that they're due. If somebody else takes their time to put together something, it is not fair for anyone else to take their work. So, a couple of announcements. You guys asked me on the first call. Summer school will be online, so you need to kind of keep an eye out for ALEAP on aleapisd.net to figure out any updates as it relates to that. They're thinking somewhere around June, and those are for people who are who want to update or who did not pass this school year. Progress reports will go out this Friday, and then I believe your final report card will be going out on May the 15th. So if you guys have questions about that, let me know. Other than that, let's go ahead and get into it. Last week I posted a video, and I posted it on Tuesday, but as a summary to part 1 before going into part 2. Well, a lot of you went on ahead and started reading part 2 without watching the summary videos. And so this week I decided to post the summary of last week's assignment on Monday, so that way you can watch it before going to part 3, which is called Burning Bright. So part 2 is called the Sieve in the Sand, and I just want to do a really quick summary of what was going on. I'm going to look down because I do have notes, and I want to make sure that I'm clear and concise. So part 2, the Sieve in the Sand, starts off with Guy Montag reading to Mildred. Obviously she hates this. She's like, this is crazy. He convinces her to let him read to her a little bit before they burn all the books. So he kind of is like, yeah, I'm gonna burn the books, but first let me just read it. Okay, and he recalls the situation where he ran into this old professor named Faber in a park. And as he recalls him, he thinks like he must have copies of books. Montag had a copy of something called the Holy Bible. He didn't know if it was important, but he felt like it could be the last one. So he felt if he was going to get all his books burned, or if he was going to give all his books to Captain Beatty before he went back to work, or when he went back to work, then he at least needed to figure out whether or not he can remake the books or if there were copies of it elsewhere. So he recalled Faber. He recalled that he was an old English professor, and he thought, why not try to reach out to him? So he rings up Faber. Faber's like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Kind of hangs up on him because obviously books are illegal. And then you have this fireman calling him up like, hey, what's going on? Long time no hear from. So he's like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with that. So he decides to take a trip over to Faber's house, Guy Montag. He's riding the subway, and he starts to recall the situation with his brother, I believe, of when he was in the sand, and he had a sieve, which is one of these type of tools. And as you can see, it has holes in it. And I think his brother said to him he would give him a dime if he could fill this up with as much sand as possible before it leaking out the bottom. So he recalls trying to fill the sieve with the sand, and obviously it was like falling out before he could build it up, right? So he used this as an analogy to compare how he was going to try to quick read the Bible on his way to Faber's house. He wanted to go ahead and try to get as much information before it slipped away, before his time slipped away. However, there kept on being a bunch of distractions, and it kind of mimicked how society in this era was. It's so distracted. The announcements are going off, people are making a bunch of noise, and so it just kind of really shows you in that moment how distracted that culture is, and kind of getting you ready and prepared for things to kind of happen. So he gets over to Faber's house. Faber kind of hesitates letting him in. He doesn't really want to let him in, yada yada. And so they finally sit there and talk. Faber jokingly says to him that they should kind of rebel against society by framing all the firemen by hiding books in their houses. Montag's like, for real? Like, let's do that. And Faber's like, no, I'm just kidding. So after a while, he convinces him that he's just kidding around. And he asks that Montag asks Faber to kind of mentor him and teach him more of the story. And he ends up reading him some parts of the Holy Bible. Well, Faber discloses that he's always kind of shied away from confrontation and how he really wishes that he had done a little bit more with his life instead of allowing them to make reading of books illegal. He has this contraption or this device that he created, which is almost like an AirPod, where he invented and he offers that up to Montag to put in his ear, and he says, well, I'll help you and I will teach you kind of remotely like we're doing right now. He's like, you keep it in your ear, I can talk to you, you can talk to me, whatever. So he goes ahead and he leaves, Montag leaves, he goes back home to Mildred, and he gets there and tries talking to Mildred a little bit more. She has some company over. Two of her friends are over watching their big wall of television, and he decides to go and starts talking to them, kind of some small talk and whatnot. And through the small talk, he tries to probe them. They're very surface level, very superficial. They're not talking about anything that's really important. And he's really trying to get some emotion out of them. Kind of in a frustrated manner, he goes and gets this book of poetry, and he tries to read them the poetry. So immediately everybody's like, what are you doing? Mildred's like, he's crazy, trying to get him to trying to get them to understand that he was just joking. She makes up some lies saying that every year a fireman gets to take a book home just to show how silly it is. So he convinces them to let them read a poem. Well, actually Mildred is the one who says, why don't you just read them so we can get over this kind of experiment, show them how silly it is to read poetry. And so he reads this poem. Poem is a deep and emotionally charging poem. So one of her friends gets really ticked off, another one gets really emotional, and she starts to cry and say, how could you? Isn't there enough hurt in the world? Why would you want to do that to people? Storms out, I'm never coming back over here again. Your husband is crazy. So before she gets to leave, Montag kind of retracts and he says, hey, I'm just kidding. See how silly this stupid book is? He burns the book. In the meantime, Faber's in his ear like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Don't do this. You're going to give it all away. I'm not going to help you if you do this. So that kind of gives him the push to fall in line with the lie and say, I'm just kidding. Let me burn this book. So her friends decide to leave. And basically that's pretty much what happens there. Mildred's upset, but she goes to bed, takes some pills, and while he goes to go for his stash of books, he realizes that some are missing, and he realizes that Mildred has been secretly burning a few as to not be so obvious that she's burning his books little by little. So he goes to work. He chooses a book. He has a book in his pocket, and when he gets there, the boys are kind of playing poker or something like that. And they're like, glad to have you back, so happy to see you. He notices that the hound is gone. The hound isn't in his cage, so he's immediately like, what's going on? And so as he's sitting there, Captain Beatty's like talking to him. He's like antagonizing him a little bit, kind of gauging where his head is. And you can see right now that the intensity of the scene has kind of gone up. So he's asking him questions, kind of saying like, are you sure everything's okay? Are you feeling well? You don't look too good. Are you sweating? He's basically like digging into him hard. Like, are you sure you're over this? What's going on? So then he takes it a step further. Captain Beatty starts basically going on this rant about how foolish people are to want to acquire knowledge. All it does is make people seem arrogant. nobody should be above the other person type of thing. But as he's doing it, ironically, he's using famous literature from the past, and he's, from what I take from it, he's really trying to test Montag to see whether or not he can identify with it, whether or not he's read some of these literature pieces. And it's very noticeable that Captain Beatty understands what's going on, and he's very well read and well rounded. And so he's basically talking to him and trying to get a reaction out of him. And meanwhile, Favor's in Montag's ear like, don't listen to it, don't feed into it, right? And so at the end, Captain Beatty's like, he puts his hand on his wrist to feel his pulse, and that kind of indicates to you that this was intense for a reason. He was trying to see whether or not he could make him so nervous. But for what? That's what I kept thinking, is why is he trying to make him so nervous? So then the alarm sets off, and Captain Beatty's like, let's finish this game later. We have a job to do. So as they're driving, Montag's thinking about his life and everything that's going on. And once they pull up to the location to burn the house down, they get to the location, and guess what? They're at Guy Montag's house. And that is how the Sieve in the Sand ends. But I want to go back to, as you're going into part 3, I want you to keep some things in mind about what Captain Beatty was saying, how knowledge makes people feel superior than the other person, that everybody should be equal. And I want you to think about that as you're going into part 3. And I want you to think about how it shapes people's reactions and what they do. Is there something worth fighting for here? Could what Captain Beatty, what he was saying, could that be foreshadowing or telling you what might be happening in the future? I really think it's starting to shape some of the themes of this novel. In particular, one thing that comes to mind is knowledge. Does it really make somebody powerful, or can too much of it be somebody's demise? So I want you to think about that as you're reading part 3. This is the last and final part of Fahrenheit 451, and we will be moving on to another assignment starting next week. So I hope you guys, I hope this made sense. I try to be fast about it, but if you have any questions, again, make sure that you message me. I talked to a couple of you last week, and I'm happy that I was able to help you. More of you need to ask for help, not at the end of the week, but during the week. So before Friday, you guys need to be messaging me and asking me if you have any questions, okay? Now watch this video. Tomorrow I'm going to upload the reading assignments, and then I want you to get into part 3. That's all I got for you guys. See you next week.